Okay, one of these things I haven't talked about, and it's just really simple. Let's say I've got multiple groups going on here. Okay, so when you're starting to create like a pretty complex file, you're going to come up with a lot of different layers, okay? And eventually it's going to get really confusing. So one of the things you can do is you can just go right here, right where you create your new page. Right next to it is a group. So we can create a folder. I can start taking all these groups and pop them into this folder. So what I usually do, like if I'm doing a really complex like digital painting or something, I might take the whole background and I'll throw those into folders, the background, the figures, the different things, because those things, if I'm doing it for a job, I'm usually going to be really overly cautious and do a lot of layers probably. And then after a while, it starts to get really confusing. Now the other thing we've talked about a little bit here, let me see if I have to put right here where it says auto select layer. I know we've already talked about that a little bit. Always make sure, I like that. I know some people who don't. I don't know why, but it makes it easier for me also. Even if I go into a subgroup, maybe I have 14 layers in there, I can click on the shape I want to edit and it'll just pop onto that layer. Does that make sense? So I don't have to go and like turn things on and off and on and off and on and off, try and find them. Now, let's grab something here. Let's grab this. I don't know whose cat this is. Let me get rid of this. Okay, so we talked about smart objects. Now we're gonna talk about two different kinds here. This is basically being more or less a linked object, but I can come in here and do the same thing. I can click on the bar or command click on the bar. Why is this not giving me anything? Or control click and say convert to smart object. And it's basically just going to link it back. It's just like kind of what we did before. What we did before was a little more elaborate version of this. But it's the same drill. I can come in here, double click that little icon, and I can come in here and alter this image. So let's do something on here. Oops. I'm going to put a layer here. Save it. Jump back and it'll alter it. Now this stuff is going to start coming in handy when you guys start doing, and we're going to talk about vector smart objects here in a second. When you start having multiple things you're placing into a complex document, you can start editing individual documents. Does that make sense? So you're popping in, it's a little less confusing, a little less, your main document's not going to have so many layers and all that kind of stuff in it, okay? Now let's take this. Is anybody here familiar with Illustrator? Use it a lot? You guys, and I'm not saying this because I teach an Illustrator class, okay? I'm not doing that, but you should know Illustrator. Even if you're an illustrator or a graphic designer, or especially if you're a graphic designer, or an entertainment design person, actually it's a really good program for you because it's great for doing really clean inked lines and all that kind of stuff, right? Like I wouldn't do any of that by hand anymore for a commercial job. I always use Illustrator for that. And you should probably have a rudimentary understanding of InDesign. Because I get a lot of entertainment design people and illustrators, and they go, well, I'm not going to do layout or whatever. It's like, there's way more to it than that. You should have a working knowledge of it. Not to mention, if you're in between jobs and somebody calls you up and goes, hey, you want to do some magazine layout? You go, yeah, cool. It pays the bills, right? But also, there's just a lot of things for that you could use it for, okay, even as an illustrator. When I put together pitches and things like that, I usually have an interactive PDF document where everything is done for them. They can click something, opens up an email document. They can click something, it goes to a hyperlink. They can click something, it goes to video. All that stuff is in one document. It's very small, and I can email it, okay? And it encapsulates everything I need to do. And it's hard to do. You can't do that in Illustrator. All right, so I'm just using Illustrator because you're going to need to know this because these programs work together. So let's take, I want to take an Illustrator document. Make sure this is all unlocked. Yeah. It's not all. And I am going to paste this into my Photoshop document. Now, see how it gives me this option right here? If I paste it as pixels, it's then going to be rasterized. Does everybody understand now what rasterized is, right? It means it's not active, it's basically, it's like a photo. But I'm not going to do that, I'm going to say smart object. And this has a huge pasteboard for some reason. Okay, so I'm going to okay, so let's say I've got this in my layout. There's other elements here. I'm going to put, I'll just do the same thing I just did. I'd have multiple things going on, some of them vector, some of them raster. But I want to go alter this vector object. So I'm going to double click the little icon, and see how it pulls me up into Illustrator. Because there's a lot of things here, I can't, if I built this in Illustrator, which this is, I can't really alter it in Photoshop. I got to alter it in Illustrator. And also, this sort of type stuff that I can do in Illustrator, is a lot of it I can't do in Photoshop. So I'm going to want to come back here and do whatever it is I'm going to do. My swatches are gone for some reason. I'm going to save it. Go back to Illustrator, and it updates it. Really handy. Because what I used to do before I knew that is, if you didn't do this, then you would drop that Illustrator document file into Photoshop. It would be a raster file. And then when you go, oh, I want to change this, you got to go back to the original document, then repaste it in. And it becomes a problem because sometimes you have these things placed and aligned inside of a document that has a lot of stuff going on. You don't want to keep realigning it all the time. So let's real quick just go over that. If you go into Illustrator, just create, you can go into Illustrator, just go to New, it's just like Photoshop. Just go to whatever, it doesn't matter what size, don't have all these documents. And if you just grab this tool here, there's a round one, there's a blah, blah, blah. You can just make a shape here, and right here you can just assign it a color. And that's really all you need to do this, okay? You just need something with a square, just something with a shape in it from Illustrator. Does that make sense? And I'll go around and make sure you guys are getting it. Okay, so we went through a little bit of layer styles, which was bevel emboss, all that sort of thing, okay? And also a little bit of filter where we had blur, all these different blurs. So well, if we go down here to, there's a bunch of different things here. So distort's one of them. And I won't go through all these because I'm going to have you guys go through them. And they'll have these, see this little grid right here? They'll have different ways of, so let's just do a fisheye thing. And it'll blow it out, right? Or you could go the other way. Go to Distort Displays. Oops, that's the wrong one. Pinch. And I can pull the whole thing in the other way. Now a lot of these are just basically pull bars and things like that. So this one, and also right here, see how we're not seeing the whole, I can move it here if I want to be closer, or I can come right here, move it around, and I can go plus, minus. If I hit the minus, then I can see my whole image if I want. Let's go a little bigger. We have to go closer for this. So you can see what it's doing to these edges, okay? That's a pretty subtle one. So let's go, because all these are not subtle. Shear is the same thing as you. Basically, the reason I don't use this tool is because it's basically over here. Remember our edit transform tools? You guys remember that? Those are the same thing. I have it right here, skew. So I have it here already. Some of these things are going to be redundant, like layer style. There's certain different places where you'll see, like, that's the same thing as that. And it is. Not all of them, though. So let's go spherize. That's the same thing, basically, as that one. Let's go to wave. Okay, so this one's giving you more. Look at, see what it's doing? It has different controls that control different parts of this. Usually it's a vertical, horizontal thing. So let's really abstract it. So what I might use that for is I might just take a random image like that and literally choose that as a background noise or something like that, just some sort of background design. Does that make sense? You're going to start seeing as you go through these things, and then you'll go to Target or someplace and you'll go, oh, there's that. You'll see it, like I used to use a lot of the Illustrator tools to make like patterns and stuff because I can do it really fast. Now, as you go through these, so that's distort, then you can go to zigzag. They're starting to becoming self-explanatory a little bit. Zigzag, right? Ripple. Now, most of these things you're going to use in conjunction with other things. You got to be careful that you don't just start throwing filters all over everything because it starts to look like that. But if you use them right, they're actually really... Noise is just what it says. It adds however much noise you want to add to it. And this is just the distribution. Uniform, let's do uniform. And it adds this noise to the image. There's a whole bunch of them in here. Noise, pixelate, so color halftone. Let's make it, let's go to color halftone again. Where would I put it? Color halftone. I'm going to put, I don't know how much I can do here, 80. Let's see what that does. And it starts to get those color halftone images, right? This one you see a lot, okay, the color halftone thing, or even just a regular halftone. Now, if I wanted to, without having to go back into it and change it, I could just go in and desaturate it and I get a monochromatic version of it, okay? So mix and match, right? Filter, let's go to, I don't want to do that one. Let's go back to here, pixelate. Let's go to, this one's just a different, let's put it that way. So it starts to get that look. Pixelate, there's one in here, I think it's this one, I'm not sure. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. So some of these I can start to come in and I can dial in sort of that pixelated thing. And there's ways you can do this where you get that sort of 8-bit look if you're looking for that. And then I think there's mosaic. There's one or two other ones. Okay, so that one, pixelate, render. Render is weird. Let's see if we can. This one doesn't let me do it. So okay, so some of these you have to do certain things for them to work. I'm not going to worry about those yet. I'll talk about those later. I'm trying to do the simple ones today. So let's go to render again. Let's go to tree. Okay, so it's going to give me a tree, and I'm going to go, oops, I don't want that. I want to go, usually it just gives you an option for different types of trees, so I don't know if this is set up. Here it is, willow tree. Let's do oak tree. So here's an oak tree. I can change the lighting direction, how many leaves I have, how big the branches are, how high they are. That looks weird. Thicker branches, so I get a prehistoric tree. Then I hit OK, and it just drops it in. So I can build a lot of different types of things very quickly. This would come in handy if you're just doing a really quick pass on, hey, this is what I'm thinking. There's some hills here, there's a tree, and you just sort of show that landscape. Then you might go back into it and paint over it a little bit, and you got a real quick comp. Does that make sense? If you're doing something conceptual or something like that. And later on, we'll get into the 3D stuff, which does a lot of really interesting things. Okay, so it's just render. So it's tree, okay, clouds. These clouds is weird. Okay, so that probably makes no sense to anybody because it didn't to me either. This works in conjunction with a lot of other things. So you just have to kind of know that with the clouds thing, okay? Because it obviously doesn't look like clouds. And then let's get back onto this layer. Okay, I'm on that layer. Let's go to filter, render. And they should have, that's weird, they don't have lens flare on here. Hang on a sec. I'm going to try something here. For some reason, it's not giving me lens flare. I'll get that to come up, and I'll go back to it. I don't know why it's doing that. That's weird. Let's go to RGB. Okay, now it's giving it to me. It's because it was in CMYK. So, okay, so here's the thing with lens flare. You have to actually be on the layer you're going to put it on, which I think is kind of a hassle, but that's just the way it is. And you also have to be careful with this thing. It's also another thing that can go cheesy really fast, okay? So let's go lens flare. And then if you see it right here, it's probably hard to see from there. I've got a little flare right there. See it? And then I can come down here to the different types of lenses. So actually, let's see if we can. No, I can't. I'm giving it a lot of brightness. So I can just beef it up. There it is, too much, right? Then I'm going to give it like a little star thing and hit OK. And there it is. And it'll do the cool little lens flare thing where it comes out, boop, 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 like you get from the sunlight. It's a really handy tool. Don't overuse it. You'll see people who just discovered this stuff and there's like lens flares all over this thing and it's so cheesy looking. Let's go. That's render, lighting effects. Now these things you're pulling around, it has points. And I could just dial in a lighting effect. Okay, does that make sense? Like all these things we're going to have to play with. So I'm just kind of touching on them. Sharp. Okay, sharpen I'm not going to worry about yet. It basically does what it says. It can sharpen up an image a little bit. Again, you have to be really careful with it. And sometimes you're using it, it looks pretty good. And then for some reason, like, you have to be careful. You'll load it, like, let's say on a social media site or something, and it starts to get this weird over-sharpened look. It looks odd. I know that sounds weird, but you have to be careful with it. But it just does kind of what it says. It sharpens your image. Okay, so then we have all these. This one's kind of interesting. So this is, okay, so if I don't, here he is. I'm going to pull him down. He's a little big. Okay, can you guys see what it's starting to do there? It's probably hard to tell. Let's make this a little bigger. Okay, see how it's adding sort of brush strokes on him? Can you guys see that? Yeah? All right, so I can reduce that, add it, I can make it, okay, so that's reducing it obviously. Like there it gets actually kind of a nice texture. Now I'm gonna go way out here. There it goes. Okay, so see how it starts to stylize it and give it that sort of impression of like brushwork, right? And then cleanness. So these are things you just dial in. That takes it out. There it goes. And then if I come in here close on them, you can see how it gave them this kind of sort of oil painty thing. Now, I might go in there and do something like that if it was just for a graphic, and then put a layer over it and take an oily digital brush and go in and start working over it a little bit, and it actually might work pretty good. I'd probably have to do, and you also got to remember that most people who are looking at this stuff don't know that that's the oil paint filter. It's just graphic designers and illustrators and all these people who look at it and get all snobby about it. Most people don't know this stuff. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so it's just different things here. Solarize. What's solarize? Solarize comes out of photography, darkroom speak, right? A lot of these terms in here are out of darkroom speak because Photoshop is originally designed to be a digital darkroom is really what it was. Then it became all these other things. And then tiles. So it's number of tiles, 10, minimum offset, and it starts to break it up. I could break it up more if I want to, okay? And by the way, if you notice, it's using the background swatch to fill this. You see that? And I think it gives you the options here. Tiles. Yeah. Fill empty area with background color. So let's go foreground color and let's go 50. And let's just try that. Okay, so it just gives me that. Okay, so it's filling it with either the foreground or the background color. Okay, and you determine that. Stylize. There's one in here, I forgot where, wind. So this one does that. See how it gives it that little, like he's blowing in the wind, obviously, right? I can switch it. This is blast. Let's just do blast. And it gives me that. Okay, and I can dial it in and so on and so forth. So let's take a break and then come back, and I want you guys to play with these. You can just pick any image, I don't care. Hey guys, look up here again. Oh, wait, let me grab one thing. I actually probably already have it. Okay, I'll use that. Okay, so look up here. If you guys do a search and you do Adobe Color Wheel, you'll get this. And what this is it's a palette generator basically, okay? So if you look over here, if you've had color theory, you know all these terms: analogous, monochromatic, triadic, complementary, compound, but so on and so forth. Does everybody know those? And if you don't, you can look them up. It's not that big a deal. Okay. Now, what it's going to do is give me, there's also tools like this within the programs, within Adobe or within Photoshop, especially in Illustrator. But I can move these around and it's going to change my palette here. Okay, and it's going to move things around based on this analogous palette. Okay, so it's going to give me an instant palette. This saves you so much time. When you go and you start thinking about a palette, you can spend hours thinking about a palette. You want to get going. You're probably going to alter it, but this will help you get there. Does that make sense? And there's a lot of different ways down here for me to start changing things. Okay, I got sliders down here. I can start going over towards the red, and it changes my whole palette to stay in this analogous idea. Or if I come over here, I always like this one, the monochromatic one, because I don't want to spend the time getting my monochromatic palette together. This just starts it for me right away, okay? Now the other thing we can do is right here where it says extract from image. Let's grab this one. Come on. What's up? It's got some color on it. Okay, so here it is. It's pulling out and extracting the palette out of that image. Here's a bright version. It takes all the brighter, because there's not really any bright colors in this. Muted colors, deep colors, dark colors, colorful. It's going to take the most bright colors out of it. This is also really handy. So if you're working on, it could be anything, right? If you're working on an environment and you go, okay, I want to get started really fast, I might go in and go desert, what do you call it? Dust storm. And I'll pull it up and I'll pull a palette out of that and go, okay, I want that sort of smoky thing, and I'll start selecting those colors to block in my painting. Or, and I've done this, if I was working on a product or a packaging line for like fall, and I'll be taking a hike up by my house, I'll start taking little pictures of close-ups of things, and I'll pull it in and create my fall palette based on fall colors out of the forest. And it just speeds everything up. Does that make sense? Now, if you're signed into Adobe, you can go right here and go, see how it has this palette? I can hit save and I can pull it up in InDesign, I can pull it up in Photoshop, I can pull it up in InDesign or Illustrator. What I tend to do all the time is I just go and I screen grab it and I just pull it in. Does that make sense? You can also convert these to Pantone colors, which is really handy. So I can get a Pantone palette started, which means I'm nailing down all my spot colors. So if I have to communicate that to a factory or something, I can go, this is Pantone 102C, this is Pantone 142C. I can't do that. If right now it's CMYK basically, right? They have that. I don't want it to be CMYK if I'm trying to specify a specific color, because then I'm saying, hey, try and hit that, and they're not going to hit it. But if I give it a Pantone color, there's a swatch that's the same across the entire planet, and it's like, that's not 10C. You know what I mean? Or 105 or whatever, okay? So it just locks down my color palette, which is really important. Because if you're trying to communicate color to a factory or whoever, another designer, forget you can't language that to anybody. They've got to have a reference point. Does that make sense? So all you have to do is just do a search for Adobe Color Wheel, it'll come up. And we'll start talking about the color tools in the program too that does a lot of this also. But I kind of like this one. I like extracting it from an image.